Good afternoon and welcome to a very special Zoom with Dan, midday on a Thursday. It's a bit different to usual. As you may or may not know, it is National OT Week, obviously a massive week on the allied health professionals calendar and in particular the OT calendar. Very excited to be joined by three professionals, three OTs that work very closely with those in the M&D space. We have Sarah Solomon, who may be a very familiar face and voice to those in the M&D community. Mimi Churchill from down in northern Tassie, and Jimmy McKernan from regional Victoria in Warrnambool, one of my favourite places in the state. As we go on today, we'll hear the expert voice and opinion around what these three amazing people do and what their role entails. But being OT week, I won't be doing much talking today. We do, as I said, we do have the three experts in the field to do all the talking and highlighting what being an OT means. So I might hand over to Sarah to talk about OT week from your perspective and your team's perspective, and why working as an occupational therapist is so special. So hello, Sarah.
Hello, afternoon. Well, I've just celebrated my 25th year of being an OT, which is crazy. And I think for me, having done quite a few different jobs over the course of my career, working at the M&D clinic's probably been one of the most rewarding and, I don't know, just a privilege and a pleasure to help people with M&D. So I think OT week is really about celebrating all the good things that we do every day. Mimi, tell me about you.
Hi everyone, thank you guys for inviting me to be on here. This is super exciting because the MND space, I feel, in Tasmania has evolved so much, particularly in the last 18 months. So my role, I guess, is limited to the NDIS space at this stage, and I can't say I've been an OT for 25 years, but I have been an OT for 10 years, and in the last 18 months, I've been lucky enough to, I guess, get involved with the MND space. Really exciting for me to see that the collaboration between OTs Australia-wide has become massive. Sarah knows that I've dropped her a line a couple of times before, and when I first saw Jimmy's face yesterday, I said, this is exceptional because you're going to be on my to-do ring list as well. But look, yeah, as I said, thanks so much. And I think the biggest thanks from me needs to probably go to MND Vic and MND Tas, being Emma Forsyth in particular, but also the biggest thank to my clients, because they've taught me the most, and they have, I guess, instilled the passion in me to really make this space an important one, and understand how the urgency for these people and their needs is so vastly important.
Thanks, Mimi. Jimmy, tell us about you.
Hi everyone, and happy OT week to everyone listening in. I'm coming in with the numbers. I'm year 12 in my OT career, so it's been a great profession for me. It's allowed me to travel and do things. So worked in the UK, and I've been in Australia for the last about 4.5 years. And during that time, I've probably had the pleasure of working with about 4 to 5 M&D clients. It's always a huge challenge. My current role here at St. John of God Warrnambool is very much a generalist sort of role. So lots of acute and rehab on the wards here. We're a small hospital, 77 beds. But we also have a large outpatient departments, community department as well. So I think the challenge always with M&D is, the progression of that illness is, it really tests all of your OT skills, from working with someone at the very beginning, and when they're first getting their head around that diagnosis of M&D, and at that stage symptoms might be quite mild, and doing some of that advanced care planning work to plan for the future. And, leading on to the very sort of high spec things that happen later on in terms of wheelchairs and, AAC devices and things like that. So for me, it's always a huge challenge, and I definitely agree with what Mimi said there about how much you learn from these patients. So I think they've taught me huge amounts over the years, and I'm pleased to say that, you know, there's a lot more assistive technology, a lot more communication between professionals and support from specialist clinics like the one that Sarah runs. And when we work together like that, you know, we achieve really great things. So there's lots of really positive stuff happening in the M&D space at the moment.
I think that's one of the messages that as an OT working with people with M&D for sort of 13 years now, when people ring me up like Mimi to just ask for advice, the one thing I will always say is, you know, M&D is an umbrella term for a lot of different sort of presentations, and it's really important as OTs to understand the phenotype or the changes that are happening in an individual, and then what those functional changes are to then be able to assist someone to live their best life. And that's often where talking to therapists out in the community all over Australia and through, you know, different sort of online forums, it's that philosophy of everyone is an individual, their life, their goals, their what's important to them. You know, it's up to us to give people as options to make an informed choice and help them, you know, do the things they want to do. So I think in OT week, that's what we want to celebrate. We want to celebrate helping people do the things they want to do. I
love it. Very good. Thank you all. And, you know, over the last few months, I have had a couple of different OTs on Zooming with Dan, and I guess the OT profession is, you know, pretty well known in this space. I've had Sarah on right at the beginning of COVID and right at the beginning of COVID, of Zooming with Dan, and also had Sarah's colleague, Maddie Dazenko, talking about assistive technology. But today is a great opportunity to highlight, I guess, the differences in the OT accessibility to equipment and other services from a regional point of view too, because yes, we have Sarah at Calvary Health Care Bethlehem, very well regarded in the M&D space, but you know, those services that are provided there aren't equally available right throughout Victoria and Tassie in this case. One word Mimi mentioned earlier was collaboration, and we talk about it all the time in M&D Victoria. We can't do what we do from a services perspective without working with a whole range of professionals. And it's the same in the OT world. I know there's been a bit of talk here about Sarah and Mimi and Jimmy sort of connecting via email and the odd Facebook message or whatever. But yesterday, I think was the first time you've all caught up properly. And from my point of view, sitting back and listening, it was like you're just one big family and you know each other inside out already. You know what each other go through, and just the fact that you could connect so quickly and I heard that passion and so, you know, come through so clearly. So I guess that's very heartwarming to see that you are all in it for the same reason. You are all in it to support, in this case, people with MND. So yeah, that was really, really cool. I thought we'd jump into a bit of a discussion around the OT profession and equipment requirements for those with MND and again, the challenges faced in regional areas. So I don't know who wants to jump in here first. Let's go with Sarah. You can start this conversation and then hand over to that Jimmy in Warrnambool and Mimi in Northern Tas.
Look, I think one of the things to remember for my role is this is a statewide clinic. So I and my colleagues and the service has worked really hard, I think, over the years to be able to have our department set up a bit like an independent living centre for people with MND. So we've got all sorts of things here, and we use that to be able to assist therapists who may be rural or remote or in another state, that when their client comes to the clinic, because when we're not in COVID, people travel from all over the state and from Tas to come and see the neurologist and allied health here. And it means that, or they might come onto the ward as well. And it means that, you know, someone like Mimi in Tas who's had difficulty maybe accessing something or, you know, can't get ready sort of trials of technology can ring me and say, Sarah, so-and-so is coming to clinic. Can you show them X, Y, Z? Because it's likely we'll have at least a little bit of what they need, and at least starts that ball rolling. So then, you know, therapists in rural or remote areas can at least work out if it's something that's going to be useful for this person with them. And so I think that's where, in terms of resources, you can see behind me, you know, we've got a tech room, because often you can't, as OTs, we can't always predict what someone might need. And you've kind of got to let the conversation organically just happen to work out what someone needs. And so our OT and physio department is set up a little bit like that. So if someone brings up, you know, I'd like to see what an eye gaze camera does for me, even though they may not need it, we can at least bring them in them with very little fuss. They can have a look at it, have a trial, and at least they're kind of thinking about it in a real world situation. And I think as a statewide clinic, I would like to know that the therapists who are seeing, you know, people with MND all over Victoria and Tas are able to contact us to ask if we can show people something if they're coming in, or just ask for advice, because I think that's how we certainly connect regularly, how Mimi found me, just to talk through stuff, because there is never any one answer for any situation, and it's really up to the person. So I think, Jimmy, I know that you probably don't deal so much with the Bethlehem Clinic. You'll be doing work with the Barwon Clinic, but they're set up, you know, in a similar feature, and they've developed their resource base for that same sort of situation.
Yeah, so just on Dan's point there about sort of need for equipment and the difficulty sometimes in getting specific equipment in regional areas. So for those who don't know, Warrnambool's probably a 3-hour drive from Melbourne. We're a regional town, a regional centre, so about 40,000. We have a few small equipment providers in town, but we certainly struggle to get companies and reps who are willing to travel that distance to actually trial products for people. And we often find that we're having to really think a bit creatively with our M&D patients. So as you say, we get support from Calvary Health M&D Clinic, and Diana, their wonderful OT, who's been really awesome. And some of that has meant that we've had to really try and divide and conquer. So when we work together, you know, if the patient's in Geelong for their M&D clinic appointment, we might send them to a wheelchair provider in Geelong to have an assessment done that we can't do here. We can't get a rep to travel here. We've also had to really use things like Zoom, and especially over the COVID-19 timeframe. So we've been able to engage companies like Zytec in Melbourne to do the assistive technology stuff, companies in Adelaide for mounts and various things. And they've actually been able to talk us through the setup and the nuts and bolts, as it were, of setting up this equipment on the ground, which is really invaluable. It's one thing, I guess, you know, identifying the equipment and getting that funded. It's quite another thing setting it up on the ground and actually training someone how to use it. So we use Zoom and those kind of mediums to our advantage. I think as the condition progresses, it does become harder for people to travel to these clinics in metro areas. So even with that, you know, that sort of correlates with the time frame that the needs get more complex as well. So it's certainly got its challenges, but where we fit in with the model of shared care that Sarah was talking about earlier, you know, if we're using that specialist and we're using those companies and we're trying to make the most of the knowledge that's available out there, then we usually find that we're able to get the best sort of outcome that we can with these clients. So yes, definitely working together is the best.
I think one of the sort of very small upsides of COVID-19 has been that therapists have really taken to Zoom and been very creative with how they use Zoom to be able to get services for people. I have an example where there's a lady who's in a residential facility it's only about half an hour from here, but she really can't come in anymore. But the speech pathologist called me, I sent down some technology, we then Zoomed in. So the speechy was in the ground in the facility and I was on Zoom, and we were able to work out what she needs. So I think it is the very small benefit has been that especially rural and remote therapists have been able to maybe get suppliers on board a little bit more by doing things by Zoom or other online platforms. So Mimi, how are you going down there in Tas? with your equipment suppliers?
Look, I think the biggest message that I would like to share with everybody in Tasmania is that you're not alone. So we're all facing, I guess, similar challenges, but all in all, as I said, I'm limited to the NDIS space, and I think I, along with everybody else that's been involved with the work I've been doing, can safely say we're blessed to have the NDIS in terms of equipment provision and also in terms of accessing home modifications. So I think the biggest challenge at this point for me has been accessing builders and getting the quotes that we need in terms of, a lot of them are complex home mods, so we're needing 2 quotes. There are times where we've been able to push through with 1 quote, but it is challenging because builders in Tasmania are really busy. So yeah, my message to everyone is you're not alone, and there's been huge work in this space in terms of, as I said, MND, Vic and Tas making plans for a clinic here in Launceston in Northern Tas, because it is something that to date we haven't had access to. I think the thing that I have been, I guess, uplifted by is that anybody who has come in contact with somebody living with MND or their families are really quickly recognising the urgency and also recognising the importance of the OT role. So it's been a big learning curve, but I think congratulations to all OTs out there who are working in this space, because I think we've got a massive role. And that role, I guess, as Jimmy touched on, is quite different if we're involved from the very start to whether we're getting involved later down the track. So as I said, happy OT week, everyone. And I think we all can take a minute to pat each other on the back. And I think the thing about occupational therapists is that we are all so happy to pat each other on the back and to problem solve things together. And often I say to people, yes, it's about home mods. Yes, it's about equipment, but it's about problem solving. And there are things in life that you want to do that are very different to another person with MND, very different to what I need to do, want to do. So it's been, I guess, the last 18 months, very much a learning curve. And I feel as though we're transitioning into being able to look more at people's desires and the bits about what they want to do rather than what they have to do and need to do.
That is amazing.
I was going to say the same thing.
I think the NDIS space has created opportunities for people with MND that they didn't have 10 years ago. However, it's been a long journey to this point, because certainly from trial through to implementation, there has been a lot of ebbs and flows because the NDIS is not designed for people with moving conditions. And so I think one of the things that I've often spoken to OTs about is that we do need to be very creative. We need to do a lot of advocacy. We need to be very clear on the legislation and how that fits into our reporting to make things happen for our people, because the NDIS is not really designed for people whose needs change. And there is many other people out in the world whose needs are changing as well for various different reasons. But I think OTs have always been so good at adapting to the different funding changes. You know, when we look at between My Aged Care and NDIS and those disparities, but we just make it work because our job is about making whatever funding we have available work for our people. And we work with MND Vic and MND Tas to make it work. And I think all OTs who work with people with MND have been amazing at really just pushing through some of those walls all around Australia, calling in favours, making relationships with suppliers, advocating to suppliers that they maybe need to have some things in hire. You know, I know we've done it here, even in Melbourne. And it's been the therapists on the ground that are kind of pushing those changes a little bit from the bottom. You know, we've got changes coming this way, and then we've got us on the ground, the soldiers, pushing it from the bottom. We'll get there.
Yeah. And Sorry, Dan, I'm just going to jump in there because I think this is that touches on a really important message, Sarah, here in Tasmania. So when I said people, you're not alone, I think it's a really good example within 18 months to recognise that the first power wheelchair that I put an application in for took 5 months to get. So I've been, I guess, a therapist who's been trying to preempt these things that, as you say, sometimes you can't get it right if you're guessing. But I've been so thrilled that in the last month, I've put in 2 more applications and they were approved within 10 days. Yeah. And I'm like, yes, win for OT. So it's so much about education, and everyone's on board now, I think, in terms of just being happy that things are going to be different for everyone and getting things in place quickly.
And I think as well for OTs who are involved in that really hectic pre-planning time, which is what me and the clinic does a lot with the therapists here, the OTs, the physio, speechies, everybody, is that philosophy of kind of planning. You kind of got to hope for the best, but you've got to plan for the worst, which is a really hard thing to get your head around. But that concept that I say, it's better to have the money in the bucket and not need it than have to then start applying for it when you do need it. And I think certainly therapists are really getting their head around that concept and just kind of going in and making sure that everything's kind of prepared just in case, because none of us have a crystal ball. So we've just got to dance the dance.
Love the conversation. I'm going to jump in here for a tick, Sarah. 2 things we're hearing and 2 things we all know about OTs are that you're incredibly good at working as a team and you collaborate and all that sort of stuff. And you're very, very creative. I think every OT I've ever come across is very creative, and that you need to be, especially in the M&D space, being a progressive neurological condition. Things are changing quickly a lot of the time. I want to hear a little bit about more of the nuts and bolts, some examples of things as OTs you put in place for people with MND. Some examples. I know we've spoken a bit more broadly, I guess, about the role, but I guess I'm just curious to find out, some adjustments to equipment that you might have done or given to someone with MND, etc. Some of those stories would be amazing. Who's going first? Jimmy.
Happy to jump in with that one, if you don't mind, guys. I think my biggest learning as an OT, reflecting back on the last year, is probably the assistive technology side of things in terms of AAC devices, so assistive augmentative communication devices. And I've really had the chance and the privilege to learn that with a client from the very beginning, who very quickly identified that was something that he wanted to use at the end of life. So when he was unable to communicate any further, he wanted to be able to communicate with an eye gaze device. And at that stage, I really had to go and try and find some information and do some homework, I suppose, because although I was aware that these things existed, I hadn't really had any practical experience of it. And looking back to when I started working as a community OT in England back in 2009, these sort of things weren't really on the market. They might have been around in some sense, but they certainly weren't available to most people on the ground. So the biggest sort of learning from that was in order to make that successful, we had to do a few things. So we had to, first of all, find people that knew about these things. And that involved contacting Warrnambool Health MD clinic. And we also sought out a bit of training. So went to a training day at Zytec in Melbourne called a Big Grid Day. The other things we looked at basically was a bit of trial and error. And it was basically, we discovered that these things could do a lot more besides just communicate. So my fast forward probably 12 months now, my client's really, really competent with it. He can communicate at a rate of speaking about 18 words per minute, which is about as fast, they reckon, as a non-touch typer. So pretty proficient. Emails, phone calls, text messages, Spotify, Facebook, all of the social apps, etc. Browse the internet at a really sort of high rate. each week I get some very good emails pushing things forward and really challenging us as therapists here on the ground. So I think my big learning from that is the power of a couple of things, I suppose, but the power of assistive technology with this group is just phenomenal. And it's not something I'd really known this time last year. The other thing we did, we sought out a assistive technology specialist from Zytec who was really helpful and did it all actually through Zoom as well. And they were able to take over the screen and actually adjust things and do things that we just wouldn't have the ability to do, or would have taken us a lot longer to do. But I think what we did learn is that we shouldn't be afraid of technology. We should get in there and we should learn with our clients and ultimately, you know, seek out people that do know the answers and work with them as well. And yeah, so since then we've probably trialed, I think, 4 to 5 different devices, and we've arrived at the latest model on the market. And he's actually going to be the first user of the Grid 15 model in Australia, which is quite exciting. So yeah, I think learned a lot, but I think there's a lot of really good potential there for that sort of stuff in future. And perhaps not even just with M&D groups, with other patients we might come across as well. Certainly would consider these options as well for people. So that's been my big learning from this year in terms of the nuts and bolts. Dan?
Very good. Thanks, Jimmy. Mimi, anything from you?
Look, I think for me, learning curve-wise around the nuts and bolts has actually been the nuts and bolts of powered wheelchairs. I've been really lucky with a couple of different providers here in Northern Tas. I won't mention any of them, they all know who they are, but really helpful in terms of scripting wheelchairs, but more importantly, fitting and then the after sales stuff. So many of changes along the way. I think, oh, yep, we've got that right now. And, you know, it's sometimes only a week later that I get a phone call to say, you know, it's not quite working for us how it was. So I think wheelchairs has been the biggest learning curve for me, but also, you know, again, the problem solving of somebody's 6'4" and they need a longer bed. You know, as soon as they put the bed head up, they shoot down and their feet are off the end. So just, I think, again, my message is it's about problem solving, and sometimes that takes a bit of time, but I think everyone working together, we're getting there.
Very good. And I guess from my non-experienced point of view, we had a special guest, Crichton Parker, a few weeks ago on Zooming with Dan, and he was telling us about his electric wheelchair that he just got. And if he's watching, I'm sorry for telling this story again, but he went up to a local cafe and he got it, his joystick pulled in the wrong direction. He ended up taking out a whole heap of chairs and tables and whatnot. And so it's not just a case of getting an electric wheelchair, you really do need to know how to use it. And that's, I guess, where you guys come in that educational point of view. So, and adjusting to the individual's needs, because they are so different. Sarah?
Oh, you know, I think I learn every day. I learn from every client that I come in contact with, whether it's here on the ward, in the clinic, in our NDIS service. I just, you know, I like to just talk to people now and work out what the gaps are in the things that they want to do, and then help to fill those gaps. I think that's what I say. I think the thing that I've probably learnt the most about this year, I mean, I've always been really interested in electronic assistive technology. You know, eye gaze has been something I've been really involved with for 10 years. It is not easy. It's hard, and you need to learn it, and it's, you know, but it can be so powerful. And really, eye gaze is an access method. It's a way of driving something. So like, I always give that philosophy, that sort of thing that, you know, I'm a country girl from the bush originally. When the first time you get in a car, you're not on a freeway, you're in a paddock, and it probably starts in second gear and you don't know where the brake is. And that's the same when the first time you try and, you know, to control a computer with your eyes. And it's okay if you make mistakes and you hit the wrong cell and it's slow and clunky, because it's exactly the same as learning to drive. But the thing I think I've been working on this year is that interface between what we would call mainstream technology and electronic assistive technology. So I've been working recently with our grid pad here for it to talk to our demo Alexa to then be able to do things. So you kind of got that crossover, because people that, you know, that kind of technology, Alexa, Google, all very much more cost effective than it was 5 years ago. And I'm actually seeing a guy on Wednesday with a new company that I've just found that does like setups of that kind of technology, because he's got quite a good voice, but he's struggling to do a couple of things. And I thought we could do this. He's going to be able to turn his lights on and off, be able to like make a phone call, listen to music, control the TV just using his voice. And I think that's probably something that I've been really working on, is that interface between that sort of mainstream technology and what used to be electronic assistive technology. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done in that space, and a lot of good kind of things that come out of it. But also it comes back to what the person wants to do. You know, what do they want to do? And that's the question I always start with. So my message out there to OTs is work out what they want to do.
Tell me something, Sarah. You sent me a message a little while ago about a little quote from in the OT world. I think you got it hanging up somewhere.
Oh, I think so. My quote is, medicine brings days to life. Occupational therapist brings life to days.
I love it. I think that's a really, really good place to finish. Before that, though, I do want to get one little remark from you all, just to finish off this conversation, and just tell us what National OT Week means to you. You're all clearly so passionate and experts in the field, but yeah, I just want to have one remark from each of you about what National OT Week means to you, and why it's important to recognise.
Well, the whole rebuild, re-engage, I think it's just been, you know, OT is incredibly resilient. We just keep going through whatever happens with funding or life or, you know, changes. And I think that whole rebuilding, re-engaging I think therapists have not stopped building and not stopped engaging. So I would just like to say a big happy OT week to all of the therapists around Australia that are amazing and have kept up through this crazy year. And the other thing is, I'd like to say it's very nice to meet Mimi and Jimmy online properly. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'll jump in, Jimmy. Message from me is, if you're considering being an OT and you're just finishing school, do it. It is the best. I have found so much joy from my role. I think since having a family and falling into this space in some ways, I'm absolutely loving my job. I think the biggest message for me around occupational therapy is that we're here to help, we're here to listen, we're here to problem solve what it is that you want to do. If you're unsure who to ask, I think most of the time you can start with the OT, and if it's not us to help you, we will help you find who it is to help you. It's a very important profession in this field, I've come to learn, and I think, as I said before, I love the people around me, and the collaboration that has been so important is very much continuing to grow in Tasmania. So happy OT week, everyone. And same to you guys, so good to see your faces.
Thanks, Mimi.
Hi everyone. I just wanted to say, you know, OT is a really great profession. I have to say that. It's allowed me to do things like, you know, to travel all the way from Ireland, end up in this beautiful part of Australia in Southwest Victoria, where the sun always shines. Not really. But yeah, we had a few OT students starting the department this week. So shout out to Maggie and Casey, who are probably listening in. And it sort of made me reflect about sort of what's happened in the last 12 years and the things that I've picked up along the way. And what I'd say about OT, it is challenging at times, and often you can feel like you're sort of stuck behind a desk doing a lot of paperwork for the NDIS, or you know, nuts and bolts of wheelchairs, which can sort of feel like, what am I actually achieving here? But ultimately, what you are doing is you're adding quality to people's life. And I think we're incredibly person-centered. We get to the crux of what people want to do with their lives, what's important to them. And there's not many other professions around, I think, that do that as well. So I think we undersell ourselves at the time, but I think occupational therapy has got huge potential, and it's certainly a great, in terms of job satisfaction, it's absolutely wonderful. So yeah, I just second what everyone else is saying. Happy OT week, and keep working hard and keep talking to each other.
Great messages, Sarah, Mimi and Jimmy. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, your expertise and your clear passion. I think that's what really shone through and shines through all the time. Anytime I speak to any OT, really, you're all passionate about what you do. So from me, happy OT week. Thank you again, and we'll all chat again soon. Goodbye.
Bye.